So, with the military being deployed in California, we've heard discussions from, I would say, the regular populace, not as much the military, but I think the military is weighing in on this, and active duty is definitely weighing in on it. Is that there's been thoughts that what's happening in California is unconstitutional, that the military shouldn't be deployed, the National Guard shouldn't be there, and that what's happening really isn't appropriate. And we're seeing kind of both sides speaking about this. Rusty, since you were in the military and you're in the Marines, I'm very curious about your thoughts on this with respect to what do they tell you about disobeying an order? And did this ever come up in your unit with with an order that some of you had some kind of a moral problem with, or was there a discussion with the in the unit? I know that there's probably like a duty to the unit. You don't want to cause chaos with an operation that's ongoing, but do you talk about it in the barracks where you're kind of not actively out doing something? I'm curious about the mechanics of this, and if somebody ever did contemplate disobeying an order, does it have to be the whole unit as a whole, or kind of what? How would this even work?
Well, there's lots of parts of that question, and I'll start off by just laying a foundation. My mindset and my kind of thinking on this might not be the same as other people. As you mentioned, I was in the Marine Corps. I was also in the Marine Corps infantry during the time of war, and so the way that I was trained and the way that I was put into the mindset was some might be different than say an Army National Guard or Air Force, or somebody that was just living their life except for 2 days a weekend, and now they're telling that they need to um, take arms up against their fellow citizens. But when I look at this, it's my understanding that when you join the Marine or you join the military, you sign the contract. You sign the contract to give the military property and ownership of your lives. Like, one of the biggest things that I thought was kind of I don't know if I want to say a running joke or just a kind of thing that I found ironic when I was in the military, is I always thought that it was kind of funny that I was worth more dead than I was alive. When you die over in combat, you get the GI bill, and they send that back to your families, and it's a decent chunk of money. And that's and when they pay you in the military, they're only paying you a couple $1,000s a month or a year to work there. It's one of the lowest paying jobs that you can have around, is to actually be in the lower ranks of the military. And so when I look at it, like, you sign over your life and you sign over your ownership to the military, and it's their rules and objectives that kind of dictate what happens to you in the next 4 years or however long of your life. And there's been times where there happened to be a couple times when I was in the military. I remember one time I was in Japan, and luckily I wasn't in combat or had any of the serious issues where, if I disobeyed an order, lives were at stake. But I was in Japan, and I went out on a swimming excursion and got a sunburn on my body because I spent too long in the ocean, and I got a third-degree burn on my body, and the government wanted to charge me with destruction of government property because I was destroying their property by just giving a sunburn on my body.
Rusty, you said something in there, the time of war, and this is some of the things that concern me with where we're getting into, because Congress hasn't declared war since World War II. And so I worry about the shifting Overton window with regard.
I think you're right. We didn't we didn't canonically declare war, but we had military operations. I think
Yeah,
that
I'm not sure you're going to sit there and say Korea wasn't a war, and Vietnam wasn't a war, and Iraq wasn't a war. Like, if you have military troops and vehicles and complete battalions on the ground, like fighting an incursion, that's more than just a little thing. That's a war in my mind.
It's very important to understand that distinction, though, because if we're to uphold the Constitution, if we're to ask soldiers to uphold the Constitution, but then to turn around and say, but you must obey orders up the chain of command, and the chain of command is not following the rules that were agreed upon in the Constitution, then we have a problem. And that may have been other
there's
people.
no way that we're going to be declaring war on California, right? I mean, even though we kind of tongue in cheek said that Trump declared war on these United States, it was in the practical matter of what is actually happening. But like there is no scenario where we actually expect Congress to declare war on California. I mean, I think that that is not even
Yeah,
within
I
the
don't think
realm
that's a
of possibility.
situation that would happen, but every single military person when they join the service, they take the oath of service, and that was one of the things that kind of struck me about the oath of service when I took it. Is there's a line that says in there to defend all enemies, foreign and domestic. And so, right as you're at the beginning of your service, you're told, you're to obey all orders of the president, all orders of the military, and to defend all enemies that they declare, both foreign and domestic.
Well, there's also in the wake of the Constitution, whatever, in the wake of the Constitution, we have the Posse Comitatus Act, which many sovereign citizens, some people will be aware of. But the Posse Comitatus Act stated that the military could not participate in civilian law enforcement. But then, after the Posse Comitatus Act in 1807, we had the Insurrection Act, and this is what I'm seeing leaders of the military, some of the brass, talk about in Trump invoking the Insurrection Act. And is it an insurrection if people are rioting in our cities?
I don't think so, man. I think that you have the right to demonstrate, that you have the right to come together in a group. I mean, rioting is a very specific kind of a thing, which is an out of control mob. I've seen video of what's going on in California. It's not even close to rioting. I mean, we definitely have had riots in the United States, and I could imagine that deploying some amount of military to try to quell some out of control something, in an attempt to restore law and order, maybe. But I don't think we're even close to that in what's going on in California.
I mean, and to add to that the growing problem that we have there, Trump dispatched the National Guard, and the National Guard is the nationalized former state militias, dispatched the National Guard to California without the request of Gavin Newsom, the governor of California. And that is not unprecedented, but the only times that has occurred in the past were during the civil rights era.
The National Guard is just the army. I'm going to keep banging that drum. I learned that lesson the hard way. We don't, the governors can ask for help, but they're never directed by the governors. It's always just part of the armed forces.
The National Guard is not just the army.
It is part of the army. Like we went over this.
I'll
bring it up. I'll pull it up.
Okay. Well, I'm going to tell you, no matter who administers it, or through what avenues it is funded, or who it answers to, the National Guard are the nationalized militias of the states, and for those militias to be nationalized and then to be to be sent to a state without the request of the governor defies the sovereignty of those states. So that's big.
I'm busy pulling this up in the background, so hold on a second.
Well, okay. I continue. It's going to be very interesting to see how this plays out. Now, Governor Newsom has appealed to a federal district court to forestall the deployment of the National Guard in the state of California. What's he going to be able to do about the Marines? What's he going to be able to do about the National Guard? Because with them comes actual control. With the military comes control. So what we're seeing is Trump take over the state of California. And I was glad to see Governor Newsom resisting the insertion of the military into his state, but the only thing that I can see that he has to do is to slow play that as long as possible while the public realizes what's occurring.
So this is obviously not a legal document. We're just looking at Wikipedia, trying to parse through the words that are there. Arguably, this is a pretty good encyclopedia for looking things up. I don't see in here that there's anything other than what I said. So which part of this sort of speaks to what you're saying? That, I mean, it is a state based because it is organized on a state level, but it is part of the army. It's not directed by the governor. I mean, the governor has to ask. Like, if it was a state, like I remember in Minnesota when we had the George Floyd situation where he was, killed and kicked off the whole Black Lives Matter event and nationwide, and the military was organized here in the state of Minnesota, and he had to call for it. He had to ask. He wasn't at his direction. He couldn't just do what he wanted. It's not at the governor's direction.
It is at the governor's direction because the original place and the again we have to go back to an understanding that the states own the people. The federal government has no people.
It owns the military bodies. It does. Like, that's part of what,
and that is
Rusty
done
was
through
just talking about.
That's done through contract, though, and that's quid pro quo. I mean, but the militias predate the creation of the standing army.
I don't think we've had state-based actual militias in a very long time. This is not the function of the National Guard.
Well, it's still very important to remember the history and to remember the balance of powers between the states and the federal government.
I think that was what was originally framed. That was the way it was supposed to be, but that changed. It stopped being that. There was a time where the National Guard for each state was actually state-based, state-owned, and it was run by the states. But that hasn't been that way in a long time.
Well, I'm saying that's the way it originally was, and the way that was the way that changed was through the Civil War. But after the Civil War, did we sit back down and did we write down the Constitution again? Oh no, we slapped on an amendment and reinterpreted some of the jurisdiction of the federal government with regards to how they could own the bodies of the citizens of the states based on their ability to control immigration in international waters and for sailors. That has not come to a point of conflict within the United States since the Civil Rights era. And in the Civil Rights era was the last time that we saw the federal government subverting the wills of the states by sending in force. That took a long time to be accepted, or for a new status quo to come around. I don't know that, and that was only in the South. That was only in a couple of states in the South, Alabama, Mississippi. We're already seeing some of these, anti-ICE, anti-immigration, and remember, this isn't just about ICE and immigration. This is about the sovereignty of towns. Like, we use the word sanctuary and complain about these sanctuary cities, but the same people who lambast sanctuary cities are those who declare or often talk about the sovereignty of the states or the sovereignty of citizens. And
when we hear the right talk about the sovereignty of the states, they're also the first ones that are lining up saying that, the federal government should be stepping in and doing something. This does not seem like it's consistent, and I think we are seeing more libertarian-leaning parts of the Republican Party decrying this and saying that this is not the way that this is supposed to work. And likely we're going to test what the real bounds between the states and the federal government are here, because California is such a massive part of the United States. It is a economic engine that is unparalleled. It's like the fourth biggest economy in the world if you take it out of the United States as a whole. This this fight between California and Trump, this is substantive. This is not something to be taken lightly, because however this shakes out could be as consequential as what happened during the Civil War.
And I mean, I also think Governor Newsom was correct in bringing this immediately to a district court, but he's not the only one, and there's a lot of political support for his actions. And the Trump administration might express the will of some of America and some of rural America, but at the end of the day, we were not designed for people who live in Wyoming to assert their will over California. And that's what we're seeing here. I say people in Wyoming because it's a rural state. So what happens whenever Newsom continues to hold his back up against the federal government? Do we arrest him? Do we send him to jail? When Maxine Waters and Nancy Pelosi stand in line at a riot too, do we arrest them and do we send them to jail? And I know a lot of people are going to say yes, but if elections are held again in California, what will be the result of those elections? Because you're not going to get
Gavin overwhelmingly reelected if he doesn't run for president. I mean, this is like shaping up for the 2028 election. I mean, here it is. Like, Republicans might as well be handing it to him.
Yeah, well, exactly. And not only handing it to him, but building up a resolve and grow and building up a populace who is pitted against the policies of the United States. And this is the problem of relying on force. And this is also why I've been so adamant about states beginning to recognize how to get out of underneath the thumb of the federal dollar. Because force is I mean, let's look at our track record for regime changing and establishing democracy and settled states in other regions of the world. It doesn't work.
Well, we certainly have that happening here in California. Governor Newsom already said we're a donor state. We contribute $80 billion to the federal government, more than we get back. Like, what are we actually getting out of this deal? I think as the states that are the material contributors to the budget of the federal government, not that it's really balanced, so I don't know that this is entirely germane, because it's disingenuous to talk about the budget of the United States when mostly what we have is deficit spending through printing money. But it still is something that is being brought up by these governors that are saying, why is it that you're dictating to us? Why is it that we're getting nothing out of this deal and we're the ones that are contributing materially to this? I think the reexamination of the relationship between the federal government and the states is happening right now. And it's happening by the governors that are looking at this and are saying that this is wrong. And we've got governors across the entire United States who are basically lining up in support of Governor Newsom.
And we started this conversation about the viewpoint of whether soldiers should be following orders or whether they should be concerned about the Constitution. It's a lot to ask them to make judgments and weigh in on the Constitution or the correctness of their superior officers in their determinations. And this is why I was both aghast at Colonel McGregor's insistence that let's go back to the episode we had earlier this week in which we brought up Colonel McGregor and his advice to Donald Trump, that when Trump asked him, how do I get soldiers out of NATO and out of the rest of the world, our bases around the world, McGregor said, oh, well, we have problems at home. Well, that's a very dangerous solution to the problem of having the Pentagon and having our military interwoven in the countries around the world. To turn around and say, oh, well, we have a massive problem at home, and yet we have no, nothing physical or nothing has already occurred, and to bring those troops in, that's going to be a problem. But that's what we see the Trump administration doing right now.
This idea that the military is charged with upholding the Constitution, I'm still curious about the mechanism behind this, because I don't see how, if given an unconstitutional order, that you could actually uphold the Constitution. It seems like maybe that directive really can only come at the highest levels of the military. I mean, who else could realistically exercise that power than, I don't know, what is it, the generals or the people at the very top? And that would only result in what, like them making a move against the president directly. I just don't see how this could ever play out in practice. Do you know of historical places where this has actually been upheld and like a bunch of, I don't know, disobeying soldiers were found to be not guilty because they upheld the Constitution?
I mean, one, the line to uphold the Constitution is a trick played by politicians on the military. And it's a trick that that politicians play on the people of the United States. Because, I mean, even if we turn to the preamble where it says we the people, it should say we the states, because the Constitution was an agreement between states. And that's why it's very important to understand that the original design was that the federal government was given the power to call up the militias of the various states, but those soldiers were to represent the states from where they resided. Now, you asked
And
for
that was in a much different time and era as well. We're talking about like 13 states, 18 states, and with the populaces of, you know, which would be substantively less than what we have now. So even the contemplation of how this would work looks more like what we have in a state with a bunch of counties. I mean, like there was no scale that I don't think the framers were thinking about where we had a state like California. That probably would have been bigger than any country that existed during the time of the framing of the Constitution.
well, as much as slavery was an issue, that caused tension coming out of the Constitution, the lands that the United States acquired in the West also were problems to deal with, because all of a sudden you had these states that were being carved out that didn't exist prior to the document. So problems were created. But anyway, to go back to your question as to how did this work out before, I mean, the National Guard is in part created because the militias of some of the states did not want to continue to engage in the Union. Maryland, the top of the list, and you know, Lincoln in the Civil War. You know, where did the Confederate and the Union troops come from? They came from the various state militias. Actually, the Union Army came a lot from New York City, which had such a large population. But even I mean, even to dial it further back, you know, the Constitution is written in response to Shays' Rebellion. Shays' Rebellion, or the Constitutional Convention, is called in part due to Shays' Rebellion. And Shays' Rebellion is very important to remember because it was a rebellion of Pennsylvania farmers who had fought in the Revolutionary War, and they weren't paid. And then the what in their words, the Quakers, the pacifist Quakers who had not fought in the Revolutionary War, but had decided that there was going to be this thing called government that came afterwards, turn around and were taxing them. And they said, well, if you're not going to pay us, and then you're going to turn around and tax us, and we were the ones who fought for your liberty to begin with, we're not gonna play in this stupid game that you wrote down on a piece of paper and you're trying to hold over our heads. So these concerns about the military and whether politicians lead or the military lead, you know, predate the Constitution of the United States.
So do you see that if there's, you know, mobilization, because that we're seeing the population getting out in the streets in a way that I think is pretty substantive. Like this is this is not a small thing, and it's happening across the United States, and kind of started earlier in the Trump administration where we had protests happening. But like we have a substantial number of people that are out in the streets doing this, protesting, and it's not all violent. I would say a lot of it's not violent. I've seen a lot of video of this being relatively peaceful, but when you have this amount of people out in the streets, the government has to be somewhat alarmed, because this is not the normal state that I think the politicians want the country in.
I mean, I see a lot of pushback against some of the policies of the Republicans, and yes, I think that we will see more, especially in urban areas, to see demonstrations, if not specifically against the actions of ICE and the deportations, against the calling out the military. And it's my fear that the government is going to appeal to fears about Mexican cartels and Chinese fentanyl, and I'm already seeing them beating those drums ever since before they took office. And those are calculated positions to take, because they could see this issue coming in the future. And probably have had some degree of discussion as to what the reason for bringing the troops home was going to be. I'm happy to see the United States give up on American primacy and control of other countries around the world through our military, while we slap on it the euphemism of defense. But I worry about what that means, that they are unable to control and direct the Pentagon, and their response is to bring a match into a theater and yell fire here at home. So,
Well, and this is part of what Trump is struggling against, isn't it? That he seems to not be 100% in control of the Pentagon. So there is dissent from the Pentagon towards some of what Trump's trying to do.
I mean, it's not just seems. We've heard it from Trump himself and from other officials that that the Pentagon is acting with a mind of its own. And there's any number of number of examples that we can give for proof of that. But to bring it back to the political calculus and what's going to happen here in America, one, I think that we will see some sort of relaxing of the pressure with the midterm elections, because the public is going to be able to, express their support or their resolution against these policies in the midterm elections. But until then, and that's also got to be the window that the Trump administration is looking at and saying, how much can we get away with before the midterm elections? How much can we also begin to lay out our case of the difficult options that we've had? Because I also don't want to, I don't know, impugn their decisions as being like anti-American or I mean, to me, the Trump administration is looking at the problem of the American foreign relations around the world, and the inability to make the political case for closing out those relations, their inability to fight the Pentagon. But the American people, the states, and especially those people who are caught up and act in violence, they're not going to get away with it like they thought before. And I don't I don't like to see violence in any of these causes. But at the same time, it's burning of a car in the middle of a street is a lot different than is, I guess, a lot is a less of a problem than Americans giving up our autonomy or giving up our liberty into to the generals of the military and turning over our political decisions to them.
That's kind of a good point here in what's going on. It's not like we have two sides against each other here. This isn't like when we had the civil rights movement where there were people who were adamantly opposed to integration, or in the Civil War where we had two sides that were opposed to each other. Here we've got protests, and we have people of the United States saying that they don't like a policy that's going on here, and that they don't want the mass deportations of illegal immigrants. There's no, I don't, is there really an opposing side here? I mean, are the people who saying that they want these people to pose? I don't think they're even in the streets. It's not like we have two clashing groups that are fighting against each other, like two warring football clubs, out in the streets. Like this is demonstrations being quelled by the U.S. government through the use of police and the National Guard, and in most cases, it's not even needed. Like, this is just peaceful. So I'm not sure what's really happening here as far as it turning violent.
I mean, these things that are occurring put me in mind also of the strikes at the turn of the century, the early 1900s, late 1890s, and up through the 40s. I guess the 40s of FDR, there was a, maybe I should have done a little more research on this, but Roosevelt, some of the progressive Republicans, they called out the military to put down these strikes. There was the Ludlow massacre that occurred in Colorado. Pinkerton agents were called because we had reached a point in which the politicians said, "Oh, I don't want to call out the military, because if things get ugly, then I'm left carrying that bag." And so Rockefeller, whenever the coal miners were striking in Trinidad, Colorado, instead called the Blackwater of their day, the Pinkerton Agency of Chicago, and they sent a bunch of agents out and they killed the miners. Maybe as many as 100 miners. I forget what the numbers are. But what's the difference in sending out the military to put down a strike and to send out the military to put down a political protest?
Well, and especially when you have the governor not supporting it. It's one thing if the governor of a state says, "I'm trying to restore law and order." You have Gavin Newsom here saying that there is no need for any of this, and I don't want it, and you're doing this without my consent. I'm the one who leads this state, not you, President Trump. So are we is this setting us up for the next big constitutional crisis? Like, is that what's looming here, with Trump essentially thumbing his nose at the sovereignty of the state? Because that seems like really what's at issue here.
I think a constitutional crisis is a good phrase to put on it, because yes, and often the federal government operates on the appearance of power. Like, very few people understand that. I mean, let's look at the congressional hearings where they pretend it's a trial. It's not a trial. They don't have the ability to do much to the witnesses, to compel them to talk, to extract from them the truth. You have 5 minutes, whether you're a rep or a senator, and they put on a great show, but the power of the government is in the power of the purse, or the power of Congress is in the power of the purse, and for them to be tipping their hand and fainting with thinking that they're going to be able to withhold the power of the military over the heads of especially states who are not playing along, that's not going to last. And ultimately the federal government is going to be poorer in their estimation and in their power coming out of this conflict.
Have you seen much coming from the likes of Ron Paul or other thought leaders on the libertarian side? Like, how are they weighing in on this?
I haven't listened to Ron Paul. I did see that he tweeted that that the National Guard had been called out without the request of Gavin Newsom. So I know that I could tell from his tweet that he did not that he thought that was dangerous, and that was trespassing on the value of liberty in America. So I would imagine that Ron Paul and Dan McAdams are both going to be very loud in opposition to what's happening here.
I would expect. Well, I'm not sure I have much more to say on this. You got any final thoughts? I think we're kind of coming up to the end of the hour here. Do you think we covered the subject in its totality?
I mean, I don't know that we can. I don't know that I can relate how much how important I think this issue is, because we the power of our military and the autonomy from Congress in which it operates, and which it has operated since FDR, since World War II, is of great concern to me. You know, I'll maybe close it with some comments about Stimson, who was the Secretary of Defense under FDR. You know, Stimson was one of the wise men, and Stimson was a great character to think about, to listen to his words. He was sort of an old school military man. Whenever the State Department wanted to set up a spy network, and a spy network that was going to not be taken down after the conclusion of the war, he said, we can't trust these people. He said, gentlemen don't read each other's letters. And he also when the other generals and people in the military were talking about setting up NATO, he said this, the way that you trust other nations is to trust other nations. You start with trust. And he's been sidelined. I doubt many people have ever even heard his name, because we've lived in, since World War II, we had a takeover in our foreign relations, both in politics and in the military, in which we had no trust in others. And when we did say we had trust, it was because we had accumulated some sort of coercive control over them by setting up bases that we said were for defense in their country, or by paying off their politicians so that they would play along with us in secret. And that's actually what's drawing to an end here. When I see successful leaders who have been able to stand up to the American empire and do the most damage to it, is because they tell the truth, and they tell it openly. So I'd say we all should do a little reading on Stimson and think about where power comes from, because he had it right. And we need to get back to that. So I'll leave it there.
All right. We'll catch you next time on FOMO.